I'm so happy to be hosting everyone, all of you fantastic humans here on this live recording. We're at episode 22 of Inspiring Insights. I'm your host, Erin. If you don't know me, I'm from a small town called Burlington, Newfoundland, and now I live in Toronto. I offer global mindfulness services and energy medicine on that scale. And I come from a long line of ancestors of Irish and English farmers, fishers, and miners. And I say that because it's important to socially locate yourself when you're in a position on a platform like this. And, you know, ever since I was born, I always knew that I wanted to get into the business of amplifying voices. And you know, I wasn't sure how that would happen. I knew that it wasn't necessarily going to be my voice. And I think this past year has really spoken to that. And I'm really happy that, you know, this platform can be a host and a brave space for folks to come on here in the wellness industry that are doing amazing things. So, you know, every day I wake up and I ask myself, what makes me feel alive? What makes me feel inspired? And the answer is always connecting to other folks that have aligned themselves with their own healing ability. And so, you know, that's what Inspiring Insights is all about. It's a space to share passions of wellness providers, of coaches, of practitioners, and really getting to know them and hearing their stories alongside all you fans out there and all the audience members. So thank you for being here. Inspiring Insights is a show brought to you by Reawaken Co., which is an online education platform focused on connecting you to the right natural wellness practitioner so that you don't get lost in the current patriarchal, disempowering, I would say broken system that we have right now. We're doing our best, but it's pretty broken. And, you know, doing the work of decolonizing and shedding ingrained oppression can be really hard and really heavy. And it's important that we do it and that we do it now. And that's why it's important to have a good support network of wellness professionals behind you when you need it. So if you are tuning in right now, like I said before, drop a little wave in the comments section. Love to hear you, love to see you. I love, you know, just feeling your energy. And for everyone who's watching the replay, know that I'm also reaching out to you right now. And we are joining in this circle to really have this beautiful space that we're going to create today. And before we start, because February is Black History Month, I've been highlighting Black excellence on this podcast. So I want to share with you a few Black-owned businesses within the GTA, and I'll drop them in the chat as well. So I have a couple recommendations that I like. There's Plant House Company. They sell juices. Very good. Hex Infused, also juices and also delicious. There's Leaves of Magic. I'll put the Instagram.
You're gonna put them on their
handles, yeah, awesome, on the side so that people can go ahead and follow them, and they're amazing. Yeah. Like, please order. Leaves of Magic has great teas, and then so blackowned.to is actually the space where I go to kind of look for these companies, and then Black-owned CA, I guess it stands for Canada, is soon to be happening as well. So I'll put all of those in the chat right now. And I think people in the wellness industry would also be interested in those. There's a lot more on Black-owned TO, so go ahead and have a look on Instagram. And without further ado, thank you, Dr. Vivian, for that, for your patience. I really want to bring the special guest that we have here tonight into the spotlight. So we have Dr. Vivian Liang. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Allow me to read your bio, and then we'll get down to the nitty-gritty caregiving and cancer talk.
Sounds good.
Amazing. So Dr. Vivian Liang is a naturopathic doctor at Nova Health. She's passionate about the role of naturopathic medicine in integrative cancer care. She graduated from the University of Toronto with an Honours Bachelor of Science and continued her education at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, where we met. She believes in an evidence-based approach to individualized naturopathic oncology care and is committed to providing the best patient outcomes. She's been involved in, co-authored, and presented integrative oncology research, She's presented and been awarded for her research in acupuncture for chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy. Woo! She's written for integrated healthcare practitioners, The Pulse, and ReThink Breast Cancer. And in addition to all of her academia and naturopathic degree, Dr. Vivian is also on track to obtain the fellow by the American Board of Naturopathic Oncology Board certification, otherwise known as FABNO. It's a big acronym.
Yeah.
And a registered acupuncturist diploma as well. She is passionate about combining the philosophies of Western and Eastern medicine, particularly with a strong skill set in traditional Chinese acupuncture and medical acupuncture. Dr. Vivian is a member of the Oncology Association of Naturopathic Physicians, Ontario Association of Naturopathic Doctors, and the Canadian Association of Naturopathic Doctors. So glad to have you here, Dr. Vivian.
Thank you for having me again and inviting me to be on here.
I love it. And this is the very first, someone's saying, woo! I love it. I love interactivity, by the way. So if you missed that, like, go ahead, do your thing in the comments section, just like speak your truth, because I love that. As Dr. Vivian and I speak ours. So cancer, this is such a big topic, and one that's really close to both you and I, in terms of caregiving. And I think that, we'll get into all of that as we go, but I just maybe want to get a little feel from the audience who here has been touched by cancer in some way. You can just say yes or no in the chat, because I'm super interested. I mean, who hasn't been touched by cancer in some way, right? And I'm interested to know, Dr. Vivian, where naturopathic medicine comes into that mix. And because oftentimes, when someone is diagnosed with cancer, there's obviously this, whole mental, emotional thing going on, but also, okay, where does the system need me to go next, and for what, and what are my options? So how, where does naturopathic medicine fall into that mix?
Yeah, so I would say that naturopathic medicine can be a part of any cancer journey right from the very beginning, even before the person has cancer. And I think that's often missed a lot. And, you and I both have learned that prevention is key, right? And like that our education is focused in prevention. And one of those chronic diseases that we do focus on is cancer. But in terms of supporting people throughout their cancer journey, the most common person that I see is those that are starting conventional treatment and are worried about side effects, are worried about the way that, their body will handle treatment from here on out, how it'll affect them in the future. And then helping them recuperate, because, I think for those that have not seen people who go through cancer, it can be a very taxing experience on the body, and, it's exhausting, and to recover from that could take a really long time. And having the support of a naturopathic doctor on your team can really help accelerate that and help, identify areas of your healthcare that could be missed otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot that naturopathic medicine can do, as it states in your bio, that is integrative, really, truly integrative with the treatment options that are already out there, right? So, for someone who has, I like that you said, before they're even thinking about it, maybe even before they've had a diagnosis, what are some of the things that folks can do in terms of prevention, maybe, long term?
Yeah, so I would say that the most basic thing that people could be doing for prevention is having a healthy lifestyle. And, there's nothing, like, every time I say that to my patients, like, they're like, that's it? Like, is that it? And I'm like, yeah, there's nothing special about it. It's nothing people haven't heard of. But I think oftentimes, we can jump too deep into all the fancy stuff and then really miss the point of it all, which is to have a healthy lifestyle. And what does that mean, right? So having, good physical activity, an adequate amount of it, and eating healthy and eating right, avoiding toxins whenever you can. So I think like those are all things that really do have an impact on someone's long-term health. That again, it's nothing crazy. I'm not saying anything, groundbreaking, but I think oftentimes people, they're just so in their lives that it can be missed. And sometimes pointing that out to them really brings them back to the present and figuring out how to really help them forwards. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And it's true. I mean, I think it's tough because we live in a society where we're almost conditioned to be reactive, right? Instead of preventative. So there's so much that it's almost overwhelming how much you can do and how much, healthy you can be or try to be. And it seems that sometimes even still people get, a diagnosis that they were looking to avoid their entire life. So, what is acceptable to you versus like, what's off of the moderate chain in terms of like those preventative cancer-related risks?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's things in general that like, the most common one I probably see is sun exposure and also smoking. Like those are things that people have talked about over and over again to the point where people, I'm pretty sure, are just sick of hearing about it. And I think people talk about it over and over again because there's so much to support that just mitigating those risks. It's something that's it's so well researched, it's so well shown that I think it ends up being diluted in, pop culture, and it ends up being diluted in a bunch of other things in daily lives that it just we just become immune to it. So, oftentimes people, especially people who like are just tired of hearing, put on sunscreen. It's just over and over again, it kind of loses its importance. But, just bringing it back to how it really impacts your risk of getting, cancers and the impact of how it causes cancers. And I think understanding that relationship really helps people understand why changing those behaviors are really important.
Yes, sister. Yes. It gets tough. Nobody wants to hear put on sunscreen again. Nobody wants to lecture. And I think that's why, right? It's so important to, as practitioners, I think, and I know there's some practitioners here on the call. So I want to say this, as practitioners, we really need to, come at this with a place of empowering the patient to really understand and see and connect to their own form of healing, and that's not always eating a certain type of diet or, putting on sunscreen every 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that could be part of it. But, I found that just working with people and giving them directive advice is not useful. If anything, it kind of, makes them feel bad when they don't reach those outcomes and reach that. So, is there anything that someone can do right now? Okay, so like I presumably don't have a diagnosis of cancer right now. Is there anything in terms of my diet or anything that's been deemed like super good for prevention?
Yeah. So in terms of diet wise, there's no one diet, right? Like there's no one diet that's the best. But I think, the main thing is having a diet that works for you as an individual, right? So the diet that has been shown to have the most beneficial effects for cancer from a cancer perspective is not the Mediterranean diet, but more so just a whole foods, whole grains, vegetable based diet. And like, again, it doesn't sound sexy and it doesn't sound like, groundbreaking, but that's what has been shown. And combining that with being physically active, right? So at least 150 minutes a week, which is really about 25 minutes a day. Right. So if someone is brisk walking for 20 minutes, that's good. That's sufficient. Like nobody needs to go on a bender for 3 hours. and exercise on Sunday, but just physical activity and consistency is key. So I think in terms of aspects to relay to people, is consistency is the most important thing. So, changing your diet is great, but is it sustainable? Can you eat that way? And if not, what can you change about it to make it more palatable so that you can eat healthier consistently? And same thing with exercise, finding ways to fit it into your schedule so that it's not a burden or it's not too much or too little. And that is something that is different for every individual. But I think in terms of, mitigating long-term risk, we'll end up talking about, eating healthy, whole foods, whole grains, lots of vegetables, minimizing processed foods like hot dogs and hamburgers and sausages, you can make healthy sausages, but the sausages at the grocery stores are probably not the greatest. But, minimizing alcohol consumption, not smoking, that's a really big one. So those are things that are really important that people can do right now.
Nice. Great. Okay. That sounds good to me. I'm already halfway there.
Yeah. There you go. We all need a little bit of work.
Totally. And, I might be biased in this question, but I wanted to ask you a little bit more about genetic risks. If you have a parent that has died of a certain type of cancer, or even a grandparent or a sister or a brother, is there much in my own life that I can change in terms of my genetics and how those genes respond to the environment and the stresses that I'm under?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that really depends on the type of cancer that's affected. Some cancers have been associated with genetics. So for example, breast cancer is one, ovarian cancer is one. And those have specific genetic testing that's available to see if someone is a carrier for those risks. But, if someone does have one of those risks or has a parent that has cancer with one of those really genetically connected ones, then in terms of mitigating the genetic aspect of it, I think in terms of improving your health status is going to be even more so important, right? So everything that I had mentioned before is even going to be more relevant. And then in terms of mitigating the genetic risk, there's a little bit of a baseline. You're at elevated baseline risk, but that's not a death sentence, and that doesn't mean that people are going to get it. It just means that you have to be a little bit more careful, and that's not something that should prevent people from living their lives. It's more so something to take care of, and I think everyone in their lives has some sort of genetic predisposition to something, right? Like no one is walking around risk-free. And I think someone who has a genetic mutation for a specific kind of cancer that's just one of the ways. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it's just more of a reason to take care of yourself. And, if people don't need, as a healthcare practitioner, people shouldn't need a reason to be taking care of themselves other than the fact that they should be taking care of themselves, but more of a reason to.
Yeah, I hear you there. It's tough because it can become a sentence, like a life sentence and a destiny almost when someone loses somebody close to you. And, I think we'll talk more about that in terms of caregiving. But, Dr. Vivian, I wanted to ask you as well, because most of my audience is, quite young, I would say, mostly female-bodied folks who are around anywhere from 25 to 40. What kinds of cancers should they be looking out for? Maybe what are some of the ones that come up at a young or early stage?
Yeah, so I would say breast cancer is probably the most prevalent one. In terms of young, though, the demographic that breast cancer shows up in more common is it's like post 60. But that being said, a lot of my practice, I'm seeing more and more younger women, which is really unfortunate. And, that could be there's multiple reasons for why that happens. And that could be, increased testing or, for whatever reason, there's genetics involved as well. So, I mean, that's probably the most common type of cancer that I'll see of females in that demographic. Another one that I will see is also cervical cancers as well. So one way to mitigate this risk, because cervical cancer, one of the risk factors is HPV. So making sure that you have either, if you're vaccinated for it, or, you have safe sex practices, that's also going to be really important in terms of mitigating risk for that too. So, and also, one of the things that I think a lot of young women don't really realize is that, we're at this age where we feel like we're at the peak of our health, right? Like we don't need to be concerned about, our achy, breaky bodies. We're just like, we can keep pushing because this is our time to work, to hustle and to ignore our body's signs and symptoms. And I think that, because this is the age where like you could start noticing some symptoms, for example, breast cancer. If you don't notice it, it can kind of fester and spread. So it's really important to, take care of yourself, listen to your body, and to stop when you need it, right? Because I think, again, I'm sure, Erin, you've probably seen this too. Just people our age just keep pushing and keep going, and they don't realize that something's wrong until something's really wrong. So that's kind of the one thing that I would say to patients and people of this demographic.
Of course. Yeah. And that's, I think, why I've taken to, the importance of mindfulness so much in people's lives. And it's because, not only do we live in a society that encourages that and, really tells you to not stop ever, beyond that, we also don't know our own boundaries. And I think in the energetic world, because I practice Reiki as well, that there's a lot of reference to that, to boundary setting, especially in breast cancer patients. So, it's interesting to see the similarities, and also to see that specifically within, even like the 30-year-old range of people, we're just starting our lives out. We're getting everything in order. We're starting to have, babies and kids and marriages and lives and, things that are outside of us. And so, that's something that I really have gained a huge perspective on during the pandemic, is that just like settling into myself and slowing down and not having, an hour or 2 hours a day dedicated to commuting and everything else, because sitting with myself, oh my God, sitting with our feelings, so difficult.
So hard. That's why no one does it.
Right?
Yeah.
So difficult. Can I get an amen? And it's when you choose to do it, it's so hard and so easy to just be like, nah, I'm not going to do that today, and just like watch Netflix. And that's totally okay, if you're in that space. And I think, if I can say this, what all illness really does is to show us that we're not living our authentic life full enough, whatever way that means. We're not answering our call. We're not answering our dharma. And so, it gives us somewhat of a perspective to sit back and step back and say, oh, okay, I can get out of this river. I can be on the shoreline and watch things go by and still be okay. I don't have to keep going.
Exactly.
Oh, well, there's the end of my TED Talk.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Let's talk about screening guidelines, Dr. Vivian, because I think a lot of, folks, especially with breast cancer, have are we supposed to be doing self-examinations of the chest? I don't know how many years goes by. I have no idea. Should I just go see my doctor?
Right. Yeah. And I think the guidelines for self-breast exams have changed over time, which is why people are really confused about it. But as of right now, I think the recommendation is to not necessarily do a self breast exam, but to be familiar with how your breasts feel. And if there's anything that feels out of place or feels really weird, or if you feel pain, then that's a concern to bring up to your medical doctor. But in terms of, doing self breast exams, because the demographic of between 20 to 40, there are a lot of breast conditions, like fibrocystic breasts. That's a really common, and having breast cysts, those are really common in this age group. So, even though you might necessarily feel something, it might not be cancer. So it's always good to know how your breasts feel. And if there's any areas of discomfort or pain, that's something to bring up to your family doctor. But I think because of the prevalence of, other benign conditions, that's why self breast exams are not recommended as much. So it's like a much vaguer term, so just to know how your breasts feel. And in terms of screening for breast exams too, I believe family doctors will do it as a part of their annual physicals. And that's just something that they throw in there too. But the screening aspect of it doesn't start till 50, unless there's a family history of breast cancer of an immediate family member, so sister or mom. And then the guidelines will be changed in a little bit in those people. But otherwise, in our demographic, I would say, recognizing how your breast feels and noticing, if you are prone to having lumps, or if you are prone that certain times of the month, like right before your period, you get a breast cyst, like that's very common. So knowing that about your body. And again, this goes back to self-care and taking care of yourself and not being so go, and just taking time to just get to know your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What can you say about the watch and wait kind of approach? Is that good, bad, or recommended at all?
Yeah, so the watch and wait approach is normally for those lesions in the breast that they're not really sure of, and it could be benign. And it's usually the wait period is the 3 to 6 month wait period, and then they kind of repeat it and see if it goes anywhere. There's definitely pros and cons to this, right? So the cons is obviously people kind of fall through the cracks, and if you're not advocating for yourself, or you feel like something's wrong, but you just kind of wait it through. I hear so many stories of people saying, it was like they weren't concerned, and I waited however long, and then it came back as cancer, and it's like, in a more advanced stage. And that being said, that is the minority of people compared to the entire population. And I think from a statistical perspective, it's the watch and wait approach is the way for the government to, maximize the amount of resources that they have with the least amount of money. So again, I think it's important to know your body and to recognize those signs. So, if you feel like there's actual genuine concern and you don't want to wait and see approach, I would definitely advocate for yourself, because again, I also have patients who have said, they wanted me to watch and wait, but I knew something was wrong and I didn't like that. And then they pushed and pushed and pushed, and then they found out it was cancer. And I can't imagine how many stories people hear that are like that. And I think it's really important to advocate for yourself. But I mean, the watch and wait approach is usually, it works because it doesn't, it reduces the risk of people going under biopsies for unnecessary reasons. So if it is just a cyst and it'll go away, then that's fine. Then people didn't need to go in for a biopsy and, use up all of those resources that needed to perform a biopsy. And, there's, again, pros and cons to that. But the guideline, that's what the guideline says. So like that watch and wait approach.
Yeah, I hear you. Wow. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And I'm sure, Dr. Vivian, with a diagnosis of cancer in general, like I can just speak for my own background. when my father was diagnosed with cancer, it was totally like, as soon as I heard the word, it was a death sentence. It was like, oh, that's it. Here we go. You know, it's like, buckle up for this marathon train ride of a crazy, crazy time, you know, however many months you have or whatever. And there must be so much emotional health that's not, you know, pieces of our emotional health that are really not treated, I guess, or lack of a better word, from, you know, kind of the medical standpoint when there's chemo and everything else happening. So, you know, as a naturopath, what are some things that naturopaths do really well for folks dealing with the whole label of cancer?
Yeah, so I definitely think that, you know, cancer is it can be associated with a death sentence, like you said, right? Like people hear the word cancer and they're like, that's it. Let me start going to my lawyers, get my will in check. Like, and oftentimes, you know, people who do get diagnosis, some of them are indolent cancers, which means that years and years and years and years before they actually cause any issue. And the reason why that label is put on that individual who does have, you know, slower growing cancers, it's because, you know, they want people to be more vigilant about it, you know, to keep on the follow-ups and to not miss those follow-ups, right? To emphasize, you know, you have to take care of yourself. And that's what I tell people, right? When they get diagnosed with a cancer that may not necessarily be, you know, something that they may have for a long time, that, you know, this is your chance to turn a new leaf, right? This is your chance this is like essentially a wake-up call. There's no treatment needed usually in this case. And, you know, this is your chance to turn things around. And I think a lot of people see that as like a second, almost like this is your way of, like, if I don't do something now, then something in the future could get worse. But I mean, I think in terms of the word cancer in general, I think can be really scary. And for a lot of people too, just knowing that, you know, they have cancer, I think they also are afraid of how people end up treating them. And, you know, if the word gets out that they have cancer, people start treating them differently. And that's a fear that a lot of people I've talked to had, and they don't want to tell people because they don't want, you know, their coworkers treating them any differently. They don't want their boss to start, you know, taking away certain things that they have. So, I mean, I think that's very understandable. And I think as society too, we also have this label to cancer, right? Like when we see someone that has cancer, we just automatically see that. Or like if we see someone that's bald walking down the street, we're like, oh man, she has cancer. And then like you just automatically think that like, oh man, their life must be so sad. I feel so bad for them. I feel so bad for their kids. Like, and that's not necessarily the case. They might be bald for maybe just because they want to, right? Like, I think it's just associated with such a negative connotation that people don't like talking about it. And because people don't like talking about it, it's something that individuals suffer on their own. And then it kind of festers and then it goes down this negative rabbit hole.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think we could say a lot more about that.
Yeah.
Down the spiral train, you know?
Yeah.
How do we, and you brought up a good point because, okay, somebody walking down the street who's bald, if it looks like a cisgendered woman, I'm thinking, oh my God, she has breast cancer or like whatever. And it's like automatic, and I hate that. So, you know, we can unpack that as it comes. But there's so much in giving us pity to that person instead of seeing them where they are, you know, whatever that is, wherever that is. And, you know, there's such a difference between sympathy and empathy, right? The sympathy is like, oh, give me pity, like, you know, dote on me and I'm not strong enough kind of thing. Whereas empathy is like, see you, I really see you, and that must suck. And how do you need help? That goes a long way, so if anybody out there who is dealing with somebody who, has just been diagnosed with cancer or is struggling with it and has been for a while, I think it's really important to know that, doing that small act is super helpful, because folks usually are actually doing their own sort of healing in terms of, losing their own independence and all of that. So, and that's, I think, what we really need to grapple with while we're still living. With my privilege of being quote unquote healthy right now, like, we need to grapple with this aspect of how are we living, and how can we unpack and reckon with the things that we don't want to deal with, the things that we throw under the rug, because that's important, because we won't be able to do that work when we're sick. Right? So normalizing the struggle is a big one. And I'm happy that you're doing that, Dr. Vivian. So thank you.
Yeah. I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with, especially those who are, who have cancer diagnoses, but they're like, I'm more than my cancer. Like, I still have to, watch my kids on freaking Zoom school. Like, I still have those same parental concerns, but all people see is like, oh man, I feel so bad. She must be having such a hard life. And she's like, and often they're like, well, so are you. I'm having the same struggles as everyone else. And that just doesn't get translated. And I think as a society, it's because we've kind of put this huge black cloud over the word cancer. And it's, again, like, it just sounds like a death sentence, but it's really not. Or it doesn't have to be.
Shine the light on the black cloud. Just shine it.
Yeah.
The light got to get in somehow.
Yeah.
Dr. Vivian, I have so many more questions, but what I want to do is just direct folks, if they haven't already gotten it, to go down to the files section. So it's a few buttons below the chat option. Dr. Vivian has graciously shared with us her new PDF of actually care for the caregiver of folks who have been diagnosed with cancer. So go ahead and download that. That's such a great gift. Thank you, Dr. Vivian, for that. And in that, I was looking at it before our chat, and I think there's something that I would like to ask you before we open it up for general questions from the audience. You mentioned, boundaries, and I think it's important to really, really stress this, because we touched on it earlier, but the guilt that comes with caregiving for someone else who has a diagnosis of cancer. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think that is something that's super common, and it doesn't necessarily even need to be for someone who has cancer. Just in general, I think people in this age demographic have, parents or caregivers or guardians or loved ones that are getting older, and we're becoming or transitioning into the stage of our lives where we used to be dependent, and now they're dependent on us. So I think one of the biggest things that I hear as well is guilt, right? So not saying no, and to just continuously do things that are asked of us, and not knowing when that's taking stuff away from ourselves, and really affecting our own health too. So I really think that this is super common. And again, it's very not talked about, because, people don't like saying no, and people are scared of getting judged by them. They judge themselves, whoever is depending on them, they're scared of that judgment, other people's judgment. And that, I think it's, at the end of the day, it's very common, and just to acknowledge it, because you're human, and that you have feelings, and obviously you care a lot, which is why you feel the guilt. I think it would be more concerning if people did not have guilt and just said no whenever and didn't give an F about anything, right? So I think having guilt is a good thing, and having guilt is just recognizing that you have these emotions and you have boundaries that you may be stepping over or you may be blurring, but it's important that you have it, acknowledge it, but it's also something that we need to accept and continue.
Yes, totally. And if you, if folks want to share, maybe they have some experiences with that, with guilt, anybody tuning in right now, if you feel comfortable, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Just write it in the chat. You can also send it directly to me if you want it to be anonymous, and then I can just read it as an anonymous comment. There's an option for that. And there's also, if you feel comfortable, there's a option for you to come on camera and do the same and actually speak. So I know that's putting people on the spot a little bit, but it's really nice to have a little more sense of community in this. And I think that's, really where holistic health and integrative health shine in cancer care specifically. And Dr. Vivian, I was wondering if you feel comfortable enough to share a little bit about your own experience with caregiving and caregiver burnout and all of that.
Yeah, for sure. So my personal experience with caregiving has been, through the role of, being a daughter of someone who has cancer, right? Specifically breast cancer. And I think also just becoming aware of even becoming aware that I became a caregiver wasn't something that I had thought about right away. I was just like, oh, I'm just, taking my mom to appointments. I'm just sitting in. I'm just, listening to her, right? I didn't really think that was caregiving because I just thought those were, the roles of a daughter, of a child, right? I didn't really put a label on it. And I think it really sunk in when, I'm at work and I'm talking to those who are caregiving. And I'm like, you know what, I really resonate with a lot of what you're saying. And I think the caregiving aspect of it, it can get very difficult because, you're trying to do everything you can for that individual that you care about. And again, saying no and setting those boundaries are really difficult. And, feelings of guilt coming up. It's like, well, why am I saying no? Is it because I'm putting myself before someone else? Is it because I feel like my things are more important? Like, why aren't they a priority? And that guilt comes over and over again. And I think those are very common experiences that a lot of people feel. And I think when people do it long enough, they end up burning out. And burning out to the point where, they feel like they're not motivated in their own lives to move forward, and things start to slip, and the most common the most common thing that I hear is that, at work, they start losing focus, they start losing motivation, and then they, turn into this individual who's dedicated their lives on caregiving, but at the same time they're burnt out. And I think becoming and reaching that stage of burnout can be really dangerous because then you start getting into feelings of resentment as well. And just to, not to be a Debbie Downer, but at the end of the road, you don't want to have those negative feelings for that individual that you initially had great intentions for in the beginning, to care about them. And then at the end, you're looking back and saying things like, well, I didn't need to do this. Like now my whatever is ruined and all that stuff. So I think saying no and setting the boundaries is something that's so important to avoid caregiver burnout, and to recognize, what are your roles as a caregiver, right? What can you provide and how can you help? And recognizing that your needs and your health are also really important. And I think that's something that, again, I didn't initially think about right away. I just thought I just thought that I should be there. And it wasn't until afterwards I was like, you know what? It ends up being, I guess I am a caregiver, and then that's when kind of the light bulb came on. And I think when people don't have that light bulb, they're just in this circle or in this cycle of, caring and then burnout and then caring and then burnout. And I think that's really dangerous.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
There's so much in that I think, we can start to tackle as caregivers and as folks that are in the, health practitioner kind of wellness field. I think we could use a dose of our own medicine here and there.
Yeah.
Or maybe more often, more consistent, as you say.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's something that's really tough. And I'm curious if anybody has any other thoughts on that from the audience, because this is, I think, do you ever do like open work, like, create some spaces where folks can just come and, like, I know there's a lot of peer support for people that have, like, caregivers of someone with cancer, or a lot of other kinds of circles like that.
Yeah, no, I have not, but that is definitely part of it once COVID is over. But that's definitely something I really do want to start reaching out to. And, I can empathize a lot with caregivers, right? Like, coming, because when I shared about these ideas, a lot of them are like, well, I don't have the time to do that. I'm too busy doing other things. I'm too busy caring for another individual. Okay, I'm too busy caregiving. Exactly. So I think in terms of, going back to taking care of yourself as a caregiver, really improves the way that you can caregive, right? And really understanding that when you burn yourself out, the quality of care that you can provide is also not great. So understanding that and, not giving your all, right in the beginning, and nourishing yourself is so important. But that's definitely an idea that I've been kind of brewing at the back of my mind, because this is such an important topic. And especially I think for people in this demographic, it's becoming more and more relevant that, again, like we're just so into our own worlds. And when we get pulled out of it, we can be so into something else, but we often forget about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. The distraction is nice to have.
Yes.
We are soon heading into question period. Would love your questions. So start thinking, put on your little thinking caps and write down some questions for us in the chat. Dr. Vivian is here to answer, not very specific questions in terms of what we can do over, an online open session, but anything that has anything to do, thoughts on caregiving, thoughts on cancer, certain types of cancer, guidelines, etc. Please reach out and, start asking those questions now. I have one last question for you, Dr. Vivian, and that is, what keeps you inspired?
What keeps me inspired? I think that would have to be the patients that I work with every day. And I think the amount of strength I see in those who are, who have a cancer diagnosis, who are cancer survivors, they're just the light. And I think they represent so many positive things about humanity. And it's like, oh my God, I just love you guys. Just love everybody. But I think that's something that I think continuously fills my cup, and it just gives me so much pleasure to work with these folks, because it's just so positive. They're so inspiring, and the difficulties they've come through, it's unlike any other kind of person I see. So I would say my patients.
That's so sweet. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So we'll take some questions now. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for sticking it out right through 53 minutes of this. We could honestly talk for another 53 at least. I do have one question from someone who couldn't make it today, so I'm going to ask that in a bit, but I'll just leave it open for now, just in case anybody has anything right now. And any last words from you, Dr. Vivian, and how can folks get in contact with you?
Yeah, so they can contact me through Instagram and my website. So I have a contact sheet on my website, and you can contact me through there. But I can also link my email to the chat too. So if anyone has any other questions or they want to privately message me, I can definitely answer their questions there as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. And I'll put Vivian's Instagram handle in the chat as well for folks. And as well, anyone that's watching this replay through Webinar Jam, so anybody who actually registered and couldn't make it tonight, you will get sent the replay. And when you're watching it, it will look exactly as if you were attending live. So the chat will be open and everything. So you can actually ask a question right now, and it'll just come right to me through my email. So I can either forward it to Dr. Vivian or try to do my best to answer it, whatever the question is. So we have one question here from Winnie. I'll read it out. What is the relationship between a naturopathic doctor and a MD?
Yeah, so I would say the relationship is ideally a collaborative one. But that's not always the case. But ideally, it's collaborative. So in terms of working with an MD, I think it's important that, at the end of the day, everyone wants the best for the patient. There's no denying that. And I think the collaboration is what makes the process much more smooth for the patient and everyone involved. So I think in terms of in a cancer context, this is very relevant because often if people are doing conventional care, they're liaising with their medical doctor quite often. So as a naturopathic doctor in their circle of healthcare, it's important that everyone is on the same page and everyone's talking about, the concerns that each other are having. And again, it's a collaborative one, right? So, and that's the way that I work with my patients' medical team. And that seems to be so far quite positive, although, you do get people who are, not responsive, and that's not a reflection on, the patient. That's not a reflection on the naturopathic doctor. But I think at the end of the day, everyone wants what's best for the patient. And I think sometimes that gets lost in translation, whether it's due to bedside manners or whether it's due to different ideologies. But I think at the end of the day, everyone's just trying to do what's best for the patient. And I think that's to always keep that in mind and to be humbled by that and not to let ego take over. But all in all, ideally a collaborative one, but it might not be that way. But collaborative is my answer.
Mm-hmm. And to follow up on that, Winnie, thank you so much for that question. It's very useful. There are certain places that actually literally are integrative clinics. So they'll have, collaborative approaches like Dr. Vivian was talking about. Can you mention any of those specifically, Dr. Vivian? I'm sure you're more versed on that than I am.
Yeah, so in Burlington, because that's where I practice, in Burlington, we work in an integrative clinic, so Nova Health, and we have a variety of different healthcare providers there. Another one would be Springdale, and that's also another clinic that works alongside medical doctors and naturopathic doctors. So that being said, there are a lot more collaborators with other healthcare providers other than medical doctors. And I think that's more so reflecting on the way that our healthcare system is set up because, for example, RMTs or chiros, all of those individuals and all of those professions don't bill through OHIP. So their billing system is a little bit different than, a conventional medical doctor's office would. So the systems involved are a little bit more complicated. So I would say that in terms of the collaboration, usually it can be in the same office. It's okay if it's in a different office, but those are Springdale. And I can't remember, there's another one in Burlington that I'm not I can't remember the name, but another one in Toronto as well, the ICC, that's another one. So those are really great.
And the ICC stands for?
Integrative Cancer Center. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Just didn't want to
assume. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Winnie, for that question. Any other questions? I will go ahead and read out the one that I have received. So, Dr. Vivian, chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy is common, and I know that you have done some research in acupuncture for that. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, and how acupuncture in general can help patients with cancer?
Yeah, sure. So I'll address the neuropathy part first because it's a little bit more specific. So chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy is actually quite common. It's common in many different kinds of cancers and chemos, but in the context of breast cancer, it's quite common because one of the drugs in the that's given as chemo, neuropathy is common, and it's beneficial because the reason why it's needed, like an intervention is needed, is because there's nothing right now that medical doctors can do to address peripheral neuropathy. There's nothing that they can do to predict it, and there's nothing they can do to stop it, other than reducing the dose of the therapy. So that presents a really big concern, especially if, if someone's going through chemo and they get really bad neuropathy. The last thing that they want to do is to be stopped early, or they don't want to be, the dose should be reduced because then efficacy changes, right? So that's a really big field as to why acupuncture has been studied and why it's so, why there's so much evidence behind it, because there's not a really great solution for it otherwise. Another reason why it's also so great during chemo is because there are no interactions, right? You're not taking anything. You're not changing the way that the chemo is metabolized in the body. Acupuncture is just you do something on the outside and that's it. So that's why also that's another reason why this intervention has been so widely studied to work well with chemotherapy. In terms of how it works, so from a Western perspective, neuropathy usually occurs because there's damage to the nerve endings. And with chemo, because it's such a toxic substance and nerves are generally really slow at regeneration, nerves can get impacted, and after it can get impacted, it takes a long time for it to recover. So what acupuncture does is that it helps to increase the blood flow to those nerve endings and also helps to stimulate those nerve endings. And how I describe it to a lot of people is, when you have those needles at the nerve endings, you're kind of waking those nerves up. You're waking them up and letting them know that they're needed and that they still need to be working and they need to be there. That's why I find it so beneficial. And from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, what acupuncture does is that it removes obstructions and energetic obstructions. So when we have needles inserted into certain acupuncture points, it resolves those obstructions and helps the energy move better and flow through the extremities, and that will help resolve the neuropathy. So, from a Western and Eastern perspective, acupuncture for chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy has been extremely well studied and usually well tolerated. And compared to other kinds of interventions, this one has, one of the best amount of research in it.
Wow, very useful to know. I'm sure there's a lot of other unique symptoms that occur depending on, the type of cancer, the type of treatment that you're doing, and everything like that. So I'm sure this is, a bit more unique and specific to folks, but I think that having an integrative approach can really, really help with a lot of side effects of just the chemotherapy that you might be going through.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for that. That's very robust.
Thanks.
I love it. Dr. Vivian, this has been such a pleasure. Would you mind just sharing with the folks your email, just in case you don't have it in the chat?
Sorry, I totally forgot.
And your Instagram. I said that I would do it, but I don't want. I know there's some periods in there, and I might get it screwed up.
Yeah, no worries. I get it screwed up too.
There you go. So go ahead, follow Dr. Vivian Liang on Instagram. Go ahead, send her a message if you need. I love everything that you've shared with us here, Dr. Vivian. It's been super insightful and very inspiring. And I hope that all of you folks out there watching have also been inspired and inspired to not only take care of yourselves for prevention and for general health, but also for caregiving, and so that you can show up the best you can for other folks in your family that may or may not get diagnosed with some illness later on.
Yeah. And thank you, Erin, for giving me the space to talk about what I love, because this is really something that I could go on and on about. But I really appreciate you giving me that opportunity.
Of course. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Vivian. And thank you, everyone, for showing up and being here with us in the audience. This has been episode 22 of Inspiring Insights. Go ahead and follow us on Instagram. We're at reawaken_co. We're also on Facebook, the same thing. And we also just started a blog on Patreon. So go ahead, check us out. All of the places, all of the things. And we are here every Wednesday night live online. Anyone in the world can join with us. So this is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And we're going to keep it going. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.